What is justice? Minimally, it requires that persons impacted by crime have a voice. But for too long, victims of crime have not had a voice. Fortunately, victims' rights laws are helping to change this. But we have more to do. Imagine a better world. What would it look like? What do you dare to imagine when you think of justice?
I suppose I dream of a world for victims, aside from the obvious, which is that there be no victims in the first place. I dream of a world where the criminal justice system isn't just dedicated to what's in the quote-unquote public best interest. A world in which our criminal justice system appreciates the needs of each and every individual victim.
I dare to imagine that the day when victims' rights are on equal footing with defendants' rights.
I would dare to imagine a case where every single crime victim had an advocate that they could talk to at the outset of the case and explain to them their rights, explain to them the process and the procedure, so they would not be an afterthought, so they would not just be a witness that gets called if the case goes to trial, but they would be more integrated into the process from the outset automatically. And that's what I would dare to imagine.
One of the perfect futures that I imagine is a criminal justice system where victims' rights and victim services are adequately funded, where the kind of support that crime victims need to heal from the harms they've experienced, to be adequately represented, is financially affordable to them.
Envision a world where people listen and they believe and they support whatever that means, and that victims are able to find the justice that they deserve, but it's the type of justice that is right for them. Because justice means something different to every single person. And for me, justice is one thing, and for someone else, justice is something else. But if we take the time to listen and believe and support, we can figure out what that justice is. And that's the world I hope for.
Victims do not choose to be a part of the criminal justice system. They are often thrust into it by the acts of others. Yet when people think about promoting victims' rights, people often become nervous, thinking rights are a zero-sum game. But that's not how rights work.
So I think raising victims' rights doesn't in any way diminish the rights of a criminal defendant. So it's a question not of, if you raise one up, the other one goes down like a seesaw or some kind of a balance. It's a question of raising all of the rights so that everybody that's involved in the criminal justice system has a floor where their rights are protected and they can't be violated. And so raising a victim to that minimum threshold doesn't in any way lower the rights of a criminal defendant.
We've had defendants' rights for so long, and it can seem scary to introduce this new idea of victims' rights, but having practiced, worked with victims, worked on cases in the justice system, it's absolutely possible to balance those rights fairly, and it's very important to recognize the victim's role in the system.
Passing victims' rights laws was the first step. But if a crime was committed against you or a loved one, would you know your rights? Would you be able to protect them in court? Protecting and advancing victims' rights requires advocacy.
Victims' rights and victims' rights attorneys are like the microphone. Victims have a tremendous amount to say, and what they have to say is so important, and it's so important that we listen to them, both for the good of society, for the good of that victim, for the good of victims to come in order to prevent future victimization. And our role as attorneys, and the role of the law, is to create equity and fairness and justice and assist in that process to the best of our ability.
Victims should have independent counsel by their sides because they need someone who is confidential, private, and can represent their own individual interests in the justice system, and they need someone who can articulate and assert their rights in a way that the court is going to understand.
Attorneys and advocates fighting for victims' rights are not alone. NCVLI's mission is to actively promote balance and fairness in the justice system through crime victim-centered legal advocacy, education, and resource sharing. We're dedicated to building a system that supports victims' rights and participation. We're committed to helping victims become survivors.
One of the most impactful things that I see you guys do is when there is a need for victims' rights or victims' voice to be heard, you're there. It is a can-do attitude. I've called with questions or complicated sets of facts or circumstances, and Meg Arvin and her team are, the answer is yes. It's not no. It's let me think about that and let me put my brain around it and let's see what we can come up with.
NCVLI is hugely important to me personally. It's the entire reason I chose Lewis and Clark Law School here in Portland was for NCVLI. There is nothing like NCVLI in the entire country, especially as dedicated to crime victims' rights as they are. I mean, NCVLI they're the organization.
I think many victims out there don't understand the rights that they have. And having an organization like NCVLI that shines a light on victims and says, you're not alone, there is a voice for you in this process, we're going to help you, we're going to provide some resources, we're going to provide an advocate to give them some support and some help. I think that is just so important, and I'm really thankful for NCVLI.
NCVLI envisions a better world for victims and for our community.
A world in which every victim has comprehensive and meaningful rights.
A world in which every victim can access a no-cost attorney.
A world in which every victim's rights attorney is well-trained and supported.
A world in which everyone in the justice system is knowledgeable about and respects victims' rights.
A world in which victims can choose how and when to participate in justice.
A world in which victims' voices are heard and listened to.
A world in which every right of every crime victim is honored in every case.
This is the world that NCVLI imagines.
Each of us has a role to play. Help us create a better world.